But wait, there's more. Give me just a few minutes and I'll show you something most people don't understand about sleep, and especially REM sleep. Because sleep doesn't just benefit your memory, it also benefits your emotions. I want to make sure that you understand that these brain regions, the bilateral hippocampus, the bilateral amygdala, and this entire ventromedial part of your prefrontal cortex, which is so much more recently evolved, these structures, they're not just active during sleep, and in this case, rapid eye movement sleep, they're more active while you're sleeping than they are when you're wide awake. What does that tell you? That means that sleep is essential for these cognitive and emotional tasks that make us so much better when it comes to learning, retaining information, using it in novel environments, regulating ourselves in social environments, restructuring information, packaging it all together. So sleep is critical for this. When it comes to emotion regulation, how does that work, you might ask? Well, I'm again going to use an example from the world of memory. If, in this case, we have a group that sleeps and we compare them to a group who we actually sleep deprive over a single night, but before either of those conditions, we give them a whole bunch of pictures to remember, okay? And some of these pictures, imagine, are incredibly negative. We also mix in very positive pictures. And finally, we have just neutral pictures, just like a coffee cup, or maybe that's positive to somebody, a stapler, just things that are really, really neutral. And then we ask the question, what happens to people's ability to remember these negative, neutral, and positive stimuli, depending on whether they got a good night of sleep or we kept them awake? And first and foremost, what we see is that after sleep deprivation, people really only remember the negative. They have terrible memory for the neutral, which maybe you'd expect, but they also have really terrible memory for the positive. So all of a sudden, you see an increase in what we know is a natural negativity bias. Humans are built to track negativity. It was very important for our survival in our ancestral past. It's probably very important in our survival now, too. So we already have this built-in negativity bias, which is already something we need to watch out for. But under sleep deprivation, and as you'll see here soon, just to foreshadow the next module, increased stress, you see this intensification of this negative memory bias. And that's where things really start to become problematic. A normal negativity bias doesn't put you at risk for anxiety or depression. But when you see an intensification of people's ability and maybe even necessity for tracking what's emotionally negative, encoding it, preferentially consolidating it, preferentially retrieving it, over time, these natural negativity biases spin out into these very problematic conditions where the negativity bias is so strong that it's hard, very hard for you to encode things that are non-negative. So when you're highly stressed, when you're sleep deprived, you end up with an intensification of this normal negativity bias. And this is where we start to get in trouble. Now, I'm not worried about what happens if you miss a single night of sleep, or you have a child and it's really hard for a while, or you go through a predictable, difficult experience in your life, because as humans, we all do. For instance, we all lose somebody. What I'm trying to help you with here is to understand why it's so important to protect your sleep when you can, because those difficult times are coming, whether it's just a rough patch at work or a project you have to get done, or maybe your teenager has to pull some all-nighters on occasion. I'm not saying you should always sleep between 7 and 9 hours, although that would be ideal. I'm saying let's learn how to take care of our sleep now when we can, so that we're in really good shape to address and to deal with those difficult times when they come. So I'm not worried about you losing a single night of sleep necessarily. I'm worried about a culture where this is actually promoted as a good thing to do, wearing our sleep deprivation like a badge of honor. That is really problematic, because what that does when cumulative is it wires the brain for negativity to the point where it is very difficult to even input positive or neutral information anymore. So this, I would argue, is actually adaptive in the short run. We have to track the negatives in our environment in order to survive, in order to learn. Think about your most horrific memories. In many cases, it would be very problematic if you forgot that. On a species level, it would be devastating. The species never would have survived if we couldn't preferentially remember our negative experiences. We need to be able to remember them so, one, we don't repeat that behavior, we learn how to modify it, and two, so we can pass that knowledge down. So it's not that you want to forget the negative, it's that you want to restructure it so that you can ultimately talk about the negative thing that happened to you without reliving it. And that's what happens during sleep. It allows you to do both. In the sleep-deprived group, the reason we're seeing this intensification of the negative memory bias is because if you're sleep-deprived, instead of having normal bilateral amygdala activity when you're retrieving negative memories, this amygdala is lit up like a Christmas tree or a set of fireworks. It's absolutely overactivated. Why? Because you didn't sleep or you didn't sleep well, and therefore you didn't get the benefit of that regulatory break coming from the prefrontal cortex down to the amygdala to keep it under control. Again, you don't want no activity. You want a reasonable amount of activity. And that's the dance that happens during rapid eye movement sleep. You encode and consolidate and process the negative, but you do it under the control of a regulatory system that allows you to process it without spiraling out into an anxiety disorder or a case of clinical depression. So it shouldn't come as any surprise to you at this point that people who don't sleep enough or don't sleep well are at an increased risk of these psychological psychiatric conditions like depression and anxiety, because they really go hand in hand.